The elevator was supposed to take 30 seconds. Instead, it stopped somewhere between the 14th and 15th floor, and I was alone inside it with the one person in the entire building I had been carefully avoiding for the past 8 months. Her name was Audrey Sinclair, Executive Vice President of Operations at Pinnacle Group, one of the largest logistics firms in the Pacific Northwest. 43 years old, Harvard MBA, the kind of woman who could end a meeting with a single look. People around the office called her the closer, not because she was friendly, but because whenever she walked into a room, every unnecessary conversation closed itself immediately. I had joined Pinnacle fresh out of Portland State, 26 years old with a communications degree and exactly zero corporate experience. My dad drove a UPS truck for 22 years, and my mom taught 3rd grade in Beaverton. Nobody in my family had ever worked in a glass office tower downtown. When I got the offer, junior analyst, $58,000 a year, my mom cried at the kitchen table. Not because the salary was impressive, because it meant the loans were survivable. That was 8 months before the elevator. Working under Audrey Sinclair was something I had not prepared for. She was precise in a way that felt almost inhuman. Every deliverable had a deadline down to the hour. Every presentation she attended, she would sit quietly through the whole thing, take no notes, and then at the end ask 3 questions. 3 specific, quietly devastating questions that exposed every weakness in your logic. She never raised her voice. She never had to. The silence after one of her questions was punishment enough. I had convinced myself slowly and then all at once that she simply did not like me. My reports came back with more red comments than anyone else's. When I spoke up in meetings, she would listen, blink once, and move on without responding. My manager, a soft-spoken guy named Patrick, told me not to take it personally. She's like that with everyone, he said. But I watched other analysts present to her, watched her nod slightly at their work, and I knew Patrick was just being kind. By the time winter arrived, I had started thinking about leaving. Not dramatically, not with any particular anger. Just quietly, the way you think about packing when you've been somewhere too long. I started checking job boards at night. I updated my LinkedIn. I even applied to 2 positions at a smaller firm in Seattle, mostly just to see what would happen. The company holiday party was held on a Friday evening in mid-December, on the top floor of the building, which had been converted into an event space with a view of the Willamette River. I went because attendance was expected. I wore a dark blazer I had bought on sale 2 Christmases ago. I planned to stay 1 hour, talk to enough people to be seen, and leave before the dancing started. That plan ended when the elevator stopped. I had gone down to the lobby to get some air. Just a few minutes away from the music and the small talk and the glasses of wine, I was not drinking fast enough to make the conversation easier. When I stepped back into the elevator to return to the party, the doors closed, the car moved, and then, without any warning, everything stopped. The lights flickered once. The emergency light came on, dim and yellowish. I pressed the door open button. Nothing. I pressed lobby. Nothing. I found the emergency call button and held it down. This is building management. We're aware of the issue. Please remain calm. We're working to restore power to the elevator system. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to decide how I felt about this, and then I heard a sound I had never heard before. It was small, almost nothing, a short, sharp intake of breath from the corner of the elevator that I had assumed was empty. I turned. Audrey Sinclair was standing in the back left corner of the elevator, pressed against the wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the doors. She was still wearing her coat, a charcoal wool coat, expensive but understated, and her face, which I had only ever seen composed and controlled, looked like someone had taken everything underneath the surface and pushed it up against the glass. She was terrified. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, terrified. The way someone is terrified when they are fighting against something they cannot control and losing. For a moment, I did not know what to do. In 8 months of working in the same office as this woman, I had never been alone with her. I had certainly never seen her frightened. It felt like witnessing something private, something I was not supposed to see, and my first instinct was to look away, to pretend I had not noticed, but I could not look away, because her breathing was getting faster. "Hey," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "It's going to be fine. They said they're working on it."
"Monsieur Sinclair!"
I kept my voice steady. "Building management is on it. These things usually resolve in a few minutes." She turned her head slightly in my direction. Her eyes found mine for just a second before she looked away again. Her jaw was tight. Her knuckles, where her hands gripped her own arms, were pale. "I know that," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled, entirely professional, but it was also thin, like something being held together with the last of its strength. I stood quietly for a moment. The elevator was not large, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. The two of us in that space with the yellow emergency light felt oddly close and oddly far apart at the same time. "Is it the enclosed space?" I asked. I don't know why I asked. I think because there was nothing else to do, and asking felt better than watching her disappear into whatever was happening inside her. A long pause. "I don't do well," she said carefully, "in situations I cannot exit." It was such a precise, controlled way to describe what was clearly a very real fear, and something about that, the way she was still managing her language even while her hands were shaking, made something tighten in my chest. "Okay," I said. "To fill the silence, you don't have to say anything." Another pause. Then, barely perceptible, she nodded. So I talked. I don't even fully remember what I said. I told her about the drive in that morning, how I had taken the Burnside Bridge instead of my usual route, because there was a food cart I had been meaning to try. I told her about my dad's theory that the best coffee in Portland exists only in places with no Instagram presence whatsoever. I told her about a documentary I had watched the night before about container shipping routes, which I mentioned I was aware was probably the most on-brand thing a logistics analyst could admit to watching on a Friday night. I heard her exhale, not a full breath, but something close to one. "The Red Sea disruption," she said quietly. I blinked. "Sorry." The documentary, her voice was a little steadier. "If it was about container shipping in the last 2 years, it was probably about the Red Sea disruption. The rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope added an average of 14 days to Asia to Europe transit. That was exactly what it was about. A silence, but a different kind of silence, slightly less airless. I read 3 reports on it when it started," she said. I couldn't put them down. I looked at her. In the dim yellow light, the sharpness in her face had softened into something I didn't have a word for. Not weakness. Something more like honesty. "Can I ask you something?" I said. I don't know what gave me the confidence. Maybe the closed elevator. Maybe the fact that there was genuinely nothing left to lose in that moment. "Have I done something wrong?" "In my work. Because I get more read on my reports than anyone else, and I've been trying to figure out if there's something I'm fundamentally missing." She turned to look at me directly for the first time. Full eye contact held. "No," she said. "Then, you write the way someone does when they're trying to meet the standard," she said. "I send it back because I think you're capable of setting it." I had no response to that. None at all. She looked away again, back at the elevator doors. I'm not good at saying that in a way that doesn't sound like criticism. I'm aware of that. The emergency phone crackled. "We're looking at about 15 more minutes. Sorry for the inconvenience." I watched Audrey close her eyes briefly. "Reset." 15 minutes, she repeated quietly to herself, like she was telling herself she could do 15 minutes. "Tell me about the Cape of Good Hope rerouting," I said. She opened her eyes. "You said 14 days added to transit time," I said. "What did that do to your planning cycles here?" For a moment, she just looked at me, and then something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, not sentimentally, just a small giving way, the way ice sounds before it cracks. And she started talking. She talked for 11 of those 15 minutes. About the cascading delays, the client renegotiations, the inventory problems their clients hadn't even realized were coming yet. About a strategy she had proposed to the board 8 months ago that no one had approved because it was too aggressive. And that was now looking, in retrospect, exactly correct. Her voice steadied as she talked. Her breathing evened out. She stopped pressing herself against the wall. At some point, I started responding, asking questions, offering a thought or two, carefully, about the communication side of the client relationships, the parts that were technically my area. She didn't dismiss them. Once, she tilted her head slightly and said, "That's actually an angle we haven't modeled." The lights came back on, full, fluorescent, slightly aggressive after the dim emergency light. The elevator shuddered and began moving upward again. We both stood there for a second, adjusting. "Thank you," she said. It came out quietly, carefully, like she had to measure how much space it would take up before she allowed it out. "For what?" She looked at me. "You know for what." The doors opened on the 15th floor. Music, voices, the smell of catered food and too much cologne. The party continuing completely indifferent to the 14 minutes we had just spent in a stopped elevator. She stepped out first. I followed. She walked back toward the event, back into the light and the noise, and within 30 seconds she was Audrey Sinclair again. Composed, precise, present. Two people approached her immediately with questions about Q1 targets, and she answered them without missing a beat, her coat still on, her voice completely level. I got a glass of water from the bar and stood by the windows for a while, watching the lights on the river. I didn't think much more about it that night, except that on the drive home crossing the Burnside Bridge, I found myself thinking about what she had said. You write the way someone does when they're trying to meet the standard. I send it back because I think you're capable of setting it. I turned that sentence over a few times in the dark car, trying to understand what to do with it. The following Monday, I submitted my resignation letter. I want to be honest about why, because the reason was not what you might expect. It wasn't because I was angry. It wasn't because the conversation in the elevator hadn't mattered. It was because I had spent the weekend looking at a job offer that had come back from one of the Seattle firms, a role with a better title, a slightly higher salary, and a team that felt, on paper, like an easier place to land. And I was 26, and I was tired, and easy felt appealing. I sent the email to HR at 7:48 on Monday morning, before I had even fully committed to what I was doing. By 9:15, I had a meeting request from Audrey Sinclair. No subject line. Just my name, her name, 9:30, her office. I will tell you honestly that my first thought was that I was about to be walked out of the building for something I had done wrong and hadn't realized. I straightened my jacket, took my coffee, and knocked on the glass door of her corner office on the 14th floor. She was standing at the window when I came in, looking down at the street. She turned when she heard the door. "Close it, please," she said. I closed it. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat. She remained standing for a moment before she came around and sat across from me, which she almost never did. She usually stayed on the other side, the desk between her and whoever she was meeting with. That small detail registered before I fully understood why. "HR forwarded your resignation to me this morning," she said. "I wasn't sure if they would. It's standard practice for EVP-level departures." She paused. "You're not an EVP, but you're on my team, and I've asked them to flag anything from people I'm directly involved with." I didn't know what to say to that. She looked at me with that same quality I had seen in the elevator. Not softness exactly, but honesty. The version of her that existed when the performance of authority was not required. "Is this about the role in Seattle?" she asked. I stared at her. "How did you? You updated your LinkedIn in November. The Seattle firm's recruiter is someone I know. I'm not surveilling you." A pause. "I just notice things." The room was very quiet. Outside her office, I could hear the regular sounds of the floor, keyboards, a distant phones, someone laughing in the break room, normal Monday morning sounds. "Is the role better?" she asked. "Marginally," I said, honestly. "Little bit more pay. Smaller company. Is that what you want?" I thought about it. I'm not sure what I want. I think I got tired of not knowing whether I was doing okay here. She absorbed that. She didn't flinch, didn't get defensive. She sat with it. "That's on me," she said. "I know I'm not." She stopped. Started again. "I work in a way that assumes that people understand that the attention is itself a form of confidence. That's not fair. Not everyone knows that." I didn't. "I know you didn't." She looked down at her desk for a moment. When she looked back up, something had shifted. "I want to tell you something I don't usually say. What you did on Friday, in the elevator, most people would have stood at the other end and stared at their phone. You talked to me. You gave me something to hold on to." A brief pause. "I don't forget things like that." I held very still. "I also read your last 3 reports again over the weekend," she said. "Not to evaluate, just to read. You have a way of framing operational problems in terms of human consequence. What the delay means for the person at the end of the chain, not just the timeline. That's rare. Most people here think in systems. You think in systems and people simultaneously. I don't think you should go work for a mid-size firm in Seattle and spend the next 3 years underutilizing that." I didn't have a ready answer. I sat there and felt the weight of what she was saying settle somewhere in my chest, a weight that was not heavy in a bad way. "I should have told you this sooner," she said quietly. "I didn't, and I think I've been asking you to stay without giving you any reason to." She met my eyes. "I'm giving you a reason now." The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has content. "If you stay," she said, "I want to move you to the strategic operations track. Not a promotion yet that has to go through a process, but the path, the work that actually uses what you're capable of. No more junior analyst reports that you've outgrown." She paused. And I'll do better at telling you when the work is good, because a lot of it has been. I looked at the window behind her. The sky over Portland was the color of old pewter, the typical December gray that settles in around Thanksgiving and doesn't really leave until April. I had grown up under that sky. I knew exactly how it felt to stand inside it and still be home. I said. She nodded. In the elevator. Were you okay? After, she considered the question with the same serious she brought to everything. I was, a small pause. I've had that, the claustrophobia, since I was 7. I was stuck in a storage closet at school for 2 hours by accident. I've managed it for a long time, but it's worse when I'm already carrying something heavy. And Friday, there was a lot going on that I hadn't dealt with yet. The board stuff you mentioned? Partly. She looked at me steadily. Partly just. It had been a long year, and I hadn't let myself acknowledge that. Something in the way she said it made me think of my dad, coming home from a double shift, not complaining. Just being very quiet in a way that said everything. The way people who are responsible for others carry things they don't let anyone else hold. I'll stay, I said. She didn't smile. But something in her face settled, genuinely, quietly settled. The way someone breathes when's been holding tight for a long time and finally set it down. Good, she said. And then, thank you, I stood straight in my jacket and walked to the door. One more thing, she said. I turned. The Cape of Good Hope analysis you mentioned on Friday, the demand-side framing. She pulled a folder from the side of her desk. I want a memo, not a report, a memo. Your read on how we position client communication ahead of the next disruption cycle. Informal. Your actual thinking, not what you think I want to hear. She held the folder out. I crossed the room and took it. By when? I asked. When it's done right, she said. Not before. I withdrew the resignation that afternoon. The HR coordinator seemed mildly confused but processed it without much comment. My manager Patrick stopped by my desk later, said he'd heard I was staying, and looked quietly relieved in a way that made me like him more. The memo I wrote for Audrey took me 6 days. I rewrote the second section 3 times. When I finally sent it, I sat at my desk for a few minutes afterward, feeling the way you feel after turning in something you actually care about, exposed and also free. Her response came back in under an hour. 4 sentences. This is the right frame. The section on customer-facing language is particularly strong, circulating to the senior team. Expand the 3rd section before we take it to the board. Good work. I read it twice, forwarded it to nobody, saved it in a folder I have never deleted. That was 18 months ago. A lot has changed since then, and a lot has stayed exactly the same. Audrey Sinclair is still the most demanding person I have ever worked for. She still asks 3 questions at the end of every presentation that expose every weakness in the logic. She still writes in short, efficient sentences and expects the same in return. She has not suddenly become a warm, casual presence in the office. That was never who she was, and it was never what I needed her to become. But she is different in ways that matter. She asks questions now before she redirects. She acknowledges briefly when something lands well. She has started doing informal check-ins with the junior analysts. Nothing soft, nothing pastoral, just 15-minute conversations about the work, and I have watched those analysts visibly shift. Not because Audrey Sinclair has changed her standards, because she started letting them see that her attention was always a form of care, that they were always worth caring about. They just hadn't known it. 6 months ago, I was promoted to Operations Strategy Manager. It went through the process she had described, came through official channels, and arrived in my email on a Thursday morning with all the formality of an HR notification and none of the drama of a movie moment. I sat at my desk and thought about my dad driving a truck for 22 years and my mom teaching 3rd grade, and the way they taught me that work, done honestly, is its own form of dignity. I thought about a stopped elevator, a yellow emergency light, a woman pressed against the wall trying to hold herself together, and the small, barely detectable nod that said, "Yes, please talk. I need something to hold on to." I think about leadership differently now than I did when I was updating my LinkedIn in November, looking at a slightly better paying job in Seattle and calling it a plan. I used to think that leadership was a form of knowledge, that you led because you knew more, saw further, carried more certainty. Watching Audrey, and more specifically watching the parts of Audrey that she never intended me to see, I understand now that it is not certainty that makes someone worth following. It is the willingness to keep showing up to something hard, over and over, without letting the weight of it make you small. She carries a lot, more than most people in that building will ever know, And on the days when the weight of it shows in the set of her jaw, or the careful precision of her language, or the way she presses herself against the wall of a stopped elevator and breathes through something that has been with her since she was 7 years old, I think about what it means that she shows up anyway. I don't tell this story very often, partly because Audrey is a private person, and I respect that, partly because the parts of it that mattered most happened in small moments. A 14th floor elevator, a Monday morning office with the door closed, a folder handed across a desk with an instruction. Your actual thinking, not what you think I want to hear. But I tell it now because I think a lot of people are somewhere I was 18 months ago. Tired of not knowing if they're enough. Thinking about the easier road, waiting for some signal that the hard thing is worth staying for. Sometimes the signal comes from an unexpected place. Sometimes it comes from the person you were most convinced had no investment in you at all. And sometimes, all it takes to find that out is a stopped elevator and 15 minutes you didn't plan on having.